source of inspiration.
I want to start because when I heard you talk at Summit where we met, you were talking about your epic name, Baratunde Rafik Thurston. I learned that Baratunde is Nigerian, Rafik is Arabic, and Thurston is British. Yet you aren't any of these things. So in your TED talk, you actually joked just how black my mama was. So you said that at 9 years old, your mom gave you the assignment to come up with a system to live under if democracy and capitalism failed. 9 years old, your mom gave you that homework. How did your relationship with your mom and with carrying this name affect the way you moved through the world when you were little 9-year-old Baratunde?
It's hard to precisely date the time of that extreme homework assignment. So 9 is an estimate. Might have been 10, might have been 11. It was not 18. It was not 25. It was not 45. It was something in that near the first round of double digits of life. And having that placed before me and being raised by this extraordinary, dynamic, eccentric woman. My mom was raising me alone. She was a computer programmer. She had no college degree, partial college education. She had experienced and withstood a lot of abuse in her own childhood and some of her adulthood. She's a technologist and a hippie naturalist all in one bundle. And so as a kid of about 10, I had a lot of questions. I walked around, why is this like that? Who put you in charge? Why is this running so badly? Why do people not have houses? There's houses right there. There's people right there. Seems pretty simple to a kid. There's no crisis of housing. It's a crisis of opening the doors to the housing to the people living outside the doors of the housing. It's very, very frustrating. A lot of my childhood was like frustrating that the adult world didn't make a lot of sense. And as an adult, the adult world still doesn't make a lot of sense, especially when I put my child eyes on. So part of my childhood was that, just like questioning everything around me, because I think I inherited a lot of that challenge in my mother's spirit. My childhood was also really adventurous. We were always doing something. We were going to a community event. We were traveling and camping. We were exploring computer stuff. My mom was like a member of this Apple users group, and we would go to these nerdy computer meetings in the 1980s. And she'd be like the only woman, the only Black person in these like super nerdy Steve Wozniak looking guy gatherings of Apple nerds, Macintosh nerds, as the machines were called back then. So that was some of the childhood that I remember. And I remember feeling like I was having a pretty good time, but there was this underlying tension. My neighborhood was shifting around that age from one where you just go outside and play and sit on the stoop and sit on the porch and have your friends and run around and play tag, to one where there was like increasing police presence, police action. My friends' older siblings started to engage in this local entrepreneurial economic activity known as drug dealing. And there would be fights and there would be shootings. And there's just this underlying menace of unsafety and instability that was kind of lurking around that age that took some of the nice off of what was a pretty nice childhood, all things considered.
What neighborhood are we talking about?
We're talking about one of the greatest neighborhoods in the United States of America, Mount Pleasant in Washington, D.C.
That's where it happened. And from there, you started a career that I've heard you, kind of struggling with describing it, but it's a career made out of words, and it spans the intersection of race, technology, democracy in many realms. You're holding the mic like a pro because you have done stand-up comedy. You have done The Onion. You were working for Jack and Chill Politics, Black Political Bloc. You had a producer role on The Daily Show with Trevor Noah. You wrote this New York Times bestseller, How to Be Black, and you are on stages all around the world giving keynotes. In our prep call, however, you referred to yourself as a Winnie the Pooh person. And when you said that, we were taking this note, and at the same time, we were like, what do you mean? What does he mean by that? So I'm going to pose this question to you now. Why do you call yourself that?
I love t-shirts and I hate pants. That's one way to interpret it. The other is I just part of that childhood, that 10-year-old me, I was sampling things all the time. I used to make my lunch the day before because my mornings were actually really intense. I got up so early because my mom got up so early and get myself to school. And so I'd make my lunch the night before, and I made it. My mom didn't make my lunch. I made my own lunch, but I'd always do a test bite. It was like my own quality control on the assembly line. And I'd make this great sandwich, and I'm like, I just got to make sure it's okay. And then I put it in a little Ziploc bag and be ready. And that was my approach to a lot of things in childhood. I would sample. I was in a youth orchestra. I was in the Boy Scouts. I was in the Nerdy Computer Club. I was in the theater people. And so the idea of sampling and tasting and exploring all the flavors that life has to offer was this constant theme. And that has maintained itself across all these interests I have now. It's funny because you asked me a very clear question and I forgot it, but I remember that taste story and I just wanted to share it. Can you repeat your question for me so I can get back to it?
Oh, just what you mean by calling yourself a Winnie the Pooh person.
Yeah, so back to Winnie the Pooh, right? The sampling, the honey, the sweetness. So I think of Winnie the Pooh as this adorable, inappropriate, when you really analyze it, like child figure, who's always got his hand in a honey pot. And he's just like, oh, this is life's so sweet. And there's a pot over here and a pot over there. And I just saw myself as someone with multiple hands and multiple pots of honey because there's different types of honey and I want to taste them all.
Back to the storyteller, and you did an interview with Adam Grant on his podcast, Rethinking. And you said this amazing sentence, my whole world is words. I write them, I speak them, I do them on camera and on TV shows. I think there's almost a gardener's sense of reverence for words. And you had a TED talk, how to deconstruct racism, which we highly recommend checking out after the show, where you diagram white supremacy by analyzing the sentence structure of news headlines. How has deconstructing language and its meaning shaped how you approach work and your own future of work going forward?
Deconstructing language shaped my work. In part, so I'm a Virgo. It's my time. And my birthday was just this Monday. And there are some attributes of us Virgos. We're awesome. That's like probably the main attribute. But I think it's true that like there is a tendency towards some form of perfectionism and order. And for me, I've always been expressive and I've always been very committed to being understood. That's a 2 stages. You can be like prone to expression, but not care if people understand what you're expressing. You're just like, I'm going to put it out there. You get it wrong. That's on you. I take responsibility for the interpretation as well as the expression. And I'm like, well, if you don't get it, I've got to work harder to make sure you get it. I've softened up on that approach in the decades since my youth, but there's still some of that there. And so part of my relationship with words and how it shaped me is I am seeking to be understood. And so I've explored and experimented with different ways of communicating, different ways of arranging the words, writing them down, typing them up, putting them on posters, putting them in the microphone, into a podcast, putting them on my face, into a screen, live events, like poetry, all kind of stuff, musicals. Did a lot of musicals in school as a way of kind of testing the range of what can a word do? Like, how does it feel to emit in these different forms of expression? And then how do they land? And stand up, holding this mic is very, flashbacky. There's like the relationship between the artist and the word and the audience. There is a flow in multiple directions with those three elements. And the words don't exist on their own. They exist in this space between and among comedian and audience. And they're influenced by each other, by both sides of that relationship. So yeah, words have shaped my evolution in an attempt to communicate and be understood, an attempt to explore and experiment with how do you put these things together. And lastly, in a realization that words and stories more broadly are how we make sense of our reality. And so they really just are reality. Like reality is just stories, mostly made up of words. And words is like, you can call them tokens if you're in the AI universe. Images, there's these forms of expression, and mostly what we have access to is this mediated version of reality rather than so-called reality itself. And so with
And you helped
that,
us.
yeah, that comes a lot of power. Then you're like, oh, snap. So when I say something, I'm actually creating. I'm not merely describing.
Oh, I think we saw Baratunde just here freezing for a second. Are you still with us, shaping words and telling stories, Baratunde?
I
Yes, you're
am
here. You're back.
Yes, but my internet connection is unstable because they know, they heard.
And you gave us today's title, of course, with your podcast, How to Citizen. You imagine citizen as a verb and aim to reclaim collective power. This is how you put it. And you have an amazing community question for us that you gave us in advance, and we will share this community question on Menti right now so that you all can use our new platform that you're using, that we're trying out today for the first time. You go to menti.com and enter the code or scan the QR code that's on the screen right now. Our community question from Baratunde is, drum roll, what is an example, and this is a long question, of a true small d democracy you have seen in action? So what does that mean? Where are you seeing examples of people living well together? Baratunde is going to give you a few examples from his own podcast while you are putting your own responses into Menti right now. Baratunde, on your podcast, you're talking about a lot of things that give us hope for the future of democracy. Can you just share a few examples yourself while everybody else is putting in their answers into Menti?
Yeah, there is a social media platform that was born out of the Middle East called Majal. And instead of asking the question, what are you up to? Instead of designing the platform to get maximum users doing maximum engagement and unlocking all the features on day one, they created a platform for a particular community, LGBTQ plus people in a hostile environment of Middle Eastern nations. And so they were optimizing for trust, for connection, for belonging, which meant they had a slower community onboarding than the typical investor-led commercial social media. And to be able to mention and tag someone, to be able to show up in their DMs, to be able to address the largest possible community, you had to learn the ropes. You had to get acquainted. You had to adjust to the norms and unlock these privileges and these powers as you contributed. It reflects much more of the natural world. When we show up on our first day at work, we don't take over the public address system and just start yelling things. We don't email the whole company with our thoughts. And so they have approached this in a much more human way. I think of that as small d democratic. The way we define citizen as a verb on this show is there 4 principles that must be expressed. A investment in relationship with yourself, others, and the planet. An understanding of power, not as something good or bad, but just as a way to get people to do things. And there are many ways to generate it. sharing ideas, physical force, using money, gathering, giving attention. To citizen is third, to commit to the collective, not just your individual self, because you see yourself as a part of a collective, including the collective that is nature. And lastly, it's simply to show up and participate, to assume there's something for you to do. So as we scan the universe and listen to our listeners, which made them more than listeners, we found examples of companies, of civic organizations, of nonprofits, of individuals, of neighbors who were exhibiting these values and thus citizening as a verb.
Fantastic. And there are answers coming in through Menti. Thank you for joining this adventure with us. And the music is helping you think and type. My kids' school parent advisory council is one of them. We all work voluntarily together to get the school what they need beyond what the school board offers, and the school ranks 4th overall in Canada. Fantastic. Another response: in small communities online. And of course, this is what we do here as well. And I remember you, Baratunde, also sharing one example from Brownsville. I remember that Brownsville, Texas, you mentioned that on the podcast as well, as a closer to this amazing questions where you see true small d democracy in action. What is happening in Brownsville once a year, Baratunde?
Yeah. So listen, I punted on your question a bit. In Oakland, there's a group of people who've bought land collectively and are buying up their own buildings to house people affordably. In Oakland, also, there's a restorative justice group that they're working with people who are impacted by the system to solve problems. And that's related to what's going on in Brownsville, Brooklyn, where once a year, the neighborhood residents answer their own 911 emergency calls. They are rerouted away from the NYPD and to community call centers staffed by neighbors, staffed by formerly incarcerated people, staffed by business owners. And sometimes those people show up to directly intervene. You've had former gang members interrupt robberies and just like talk the guy down. You don't want to do that. And it's just a demonstration of a different way of living together, a different model of power, and that we don't always have to escalate to the most extreme version of authority to keep ourselves safe. So there's examples in community gardens, there's examples in economics, and examples, of course, in what we would think of as civics. The last example, Felix, is citizens' assemblies are these really powerful and potent examples of people coming together to determine their own policies without use of elected politicians. This isn't just referendum and like voting up or down. This is neighbors randomly selected, put into a process like jury duty, but much more wide-ranging with compensation and facilitation, and they figure something out. Ireland used this process to change their whole constitution around abortion. And that decision has only increased in public support, in part because of the process of public trust involved in arriving at that conclusion.
Wow. Last shout out to a platform that you had on the podcast, demnext.org, another example of how the future of work is working out in democracy. Demnext, Baratunde, it's basically a platform where people are conscripted to make policies. Is this an example you want to share from Demnext?
So the Irish example is that the origins of Demnext is the creators used to work. I don't remember what these letters stand for. OECD. It's an economic union of advanced developed nations, but they studied 600 examples around the world of these deliberative democratic institutions, often called citizen assemblies. And they are populated by lot, by sortition, aka random lottery. They have a process, and their influence varies. Sometimes it's advisory, merely to surface ideas. The city of Paris has used it for climate response and infrastructure. Belgium, parts of Belgium have employed it. But it doesn't have to be limited to government bodies. And I think what you just said about companies and thinking about the future of work, we can practice democracy everywhere. It is not limited to formal elected bodies of representatives. We can practice it in schools. among the students too, not just the board members for the school system. We can practice it in our businesses. We think of a hierarchical org chart, but for a business to be maximally credible, responsive to the times, and inclusive, one way to achieve that isn't just to populate the top-down infrastructure with diverse voices. Diverse voices in a hierarchical system may still operate hierarchically. Black cops haven't changed policing. So instead, you also have to think about the org structure and the flow of ideas and influence. And one way to think about that is to have a deliberative democratic process that invites in the voices of the participants in shaping the policies. So universities can practice deliberative democracies, private corporations can, tenants organizations in an apartment complex. It's just wherever there's groups of people trying to come to some shared decision making with shared interest, we should add more democracy and experiment with the processes we use to get there.
It's so amazing. Just these few examples from your podcast, How to Citizen, Brownsville and Brooklyn, demnext.org, the platform you just talked about, and of course Majal, the social media network. These are just three examples of how you are bringing the future of work in democracy to a global stage through your podcast. And I want to give everyone the chance now to ask Baratunde questions. As of today, we're trying out a new tool, new platform for that, so that everybody who is joining today, whether mobile, whether on Zoom, whether on the live stream, can be a part of this. Go to menti.com and put in the code 810-64587 or scan this QR code that you're seeing right now. We want to know what you want to know from Baratunde, and we will give you a few minutes to think with live music before that little break for the audience questions. And then after the break, we'll talk about your new television show, Baratunde, of course. I want to know one thing, the future of work of the creative class. You just wrote a piece on this platform that you're part of, puck.com, on AI in Hollywood and, of course, the actors and the writers strike. And you say, right, studios shouldn't be able to wholly dictate the future of work for a large swath of the creative class, just as big tech companies shouldn't be permitted to drop unvetted digital tools on an industry. Well, tools and changes need to be conceived of and implemented through collaboration. It sounds like that's what we're all hoping for. But what do you actually see as the future of work for the creative class? Like, is there a happy ending there, or is it Black Mirror? Like, what do you personally think?
I personally think we are trending toward Black Mirror, but that it is not too late to create something happier than that. Total happy ending, I don't think, is in the nature of human experience or existence. We will always ebb and flow. We'll have highs and lows and light and dark, and that's part of our complete selves. But I think we're in this really important moment where, for the future of creative work, a lot of things are getting decided about the nature of that work, who controls it, where their consent is involved, and what the terms of compensation are. This is literally happening in multiple industries right now with respect to AI, in the writing world and in the screen acting world in Hollywood. But this goes well beyond that. Graphic illustrators, journalists, all kinds of people are starting to ask, how do we do this? And how do we maintain a living? Yes. And how do we maintain purpose and inspiration and creativity? And how do we change with the times? Nothing's ever static. So just calling for things to never move from where they are is not tenable in the long run. Everything changes. Nature itself changes. So there's no stasis. But how we change, this is a really beautiful and perfect moment for us to challenge some of the changes that we that happen at us and for us versus with us.
Thank you for saying that. And I hope that, in a few weeks or months, we will have a better perspective on this whole thing. It's just great to hear from you that you see this as an opportunity and, not as another Black Mirror moment. And I want to know from you what you would like to ask Baratunde now. What's the best time you've had in nature that affected your work positively? This is the first question, Baratunde. So the first answer to this question is coming to you right now from our producer today, Liz, who is going to share a little glimpse into what Baratunde has been doing over the last couple of months. America Outdoors Season 2 on PBS. Here's the trailer for y'all.
All right now. My name is Baratunde Thurston. I'm a writer, sometimes comedian. Here go my bit! Yeah. And I love being outside. How does the outdoors define us? Is adventure racing the thing where you make life much harder than it needs to be? Always. As individuals? Got a new trick. Oh, yeah. And as a nation.
America Outdoors is on PBS. Season 2 is premiering right now. And Baratunde, now we have 15 minutes for about 5 questions from the audience here. We'll do this. What's the best time you've had in nature that affected your work life positively, Baratunde?
In the mid-2010s, I was running around the world doing keynotes. I got invited to Cabo, Mexico to speak about social media to a conference of surfers, board retailers and surf industry professionals. And I love to feel a connection to the audience before I address them, just to have some kind of commonality. And I'd never been surfing. So I took a surfing lesson the day before my talk. And there was a group called Roxy, which is designed to get more women involved in surfing. And they were running these free lessons as a part of the conference. And they were outfitting everybody in these bright pink rash guards, these kind of lycra shirts you wear to prevent getting scraped up by the board. So I'm out there in my bright pink rash guard, and I'm not able to, surfing's hard. It was hard for me. Maybe if you have lower center of gravity because you're like 3 years old, it's easier. But whatever the case, I just kept falling down. And I talked with one of the surf legends who just happened to be there because it was a big industry event. And they just kept encouraging me to keep trying. And I did. And I got up on that surfboard and I stood and I felt this power in nature that is like so literal. It's a very clear metaphor to be like, nature is powerful. But a wave pushing you forward, you're not propelling anymore. You're just catching what already exists and this energy that starts way, way out. And it's like connected to the moon. So it's kind of this cosmic, astronomical thing. Anyway, it really, really opened me up and it tapped me into literally a different form of power. And it helped me rock that keynote because everybody was like, yeah, you did it. You're one of us now. And then I was like in the cult of surfers, which is, always helps when you're talking to people to feel like they feel like you're one of them. So there's a very literal sense, but it also opened up other channels and possibilities and gave me a new way to de-stress from life and to recognize some clear metaphors for how do you contend with opposition, flow with things. You can't fight the ocean. Like you're going to lose every time. Temporarily you'll win, but in the end, the ocean will crush.
Thanks for surfing with us today here, Baratunde.
Yeah.
We have a lot of questions from the audience. The second highest voted. What's an unexpected learning you had recently?
Ooh, unexpected learning. I can trust people to help me more than I have. I've grown with such a sense of scarcity, and
you said that. Yeah, that's a big one.
Need to do things myself, right? I can do this the right way. I know how I want it done. I'll build my own website. I'll code the CRM myself. I'll just do it myself. And that's not a sustainable way to grow or learn, really. And so I've been surprised at how, if I allow people to support me, what they're capable of if I kind of get out of the way. It's basically everything I'm trying to teach, I also need to learn as well. That's kind of what I'm asking for. of our social systems and our governance systems. I kind of let the people figure things out in many ways, and I also need to do the same myself.
We have had that here in Remote Daily so many times. Ask for help. It's such a hard thing to do, especially when you're an entrepreneur, when you're a solopreneur.
Yeah.
When you're a person like you who is so good with words, sometimes getting the words out and just asking for help is the hard one. So thank you for saying that. The next question I also love. When was the last time you wanted to be vulnerable, but weren't, and why? It's a big one.
Ooh. That's a tricky one. Is this my wife?
We do not disclose who's asking the question.
Let me check the cameras. Who's got cameras on? Who's up in this room? Who sent you?
We have a very curious community of people leaders, and you can see here how they're starting to grill you.
Yeah. So I haven't become increasingly vulnerable in places that I normally wouldn't be. So my trajectory is opposite of this. So it really makes me dig for like, where am I still holding back? I was in a business meeting and I didn't trust the other person to be able to understand or handle my vulnerability. And it had to do with like sharing my deepest desires and plans, as well as sharing some of my deepest criticisms, and kind of updates and corrections. And I just chose in that moment, this isn't the moment. I need to like get to know this person more before opening things up that much. And it wasn't necessarily a lack of faith in them. It was just some suspicion that like the relationship that me and this person had, it wasn't strong enough to put that weight on it. And so I withheld. And part of me felt a little shitty because I was like, oh, you just got to be out there. You got to put yourself out there. But it's actually just putting yourself out there for the sake of it, being vulnerable all the time is not a good idea. And to bring it back to work, there's a lot of movement and mantra about bring your whole self to work. No, not all the time. Depends on the day, depends on the meeting, depends on what part of myself and what the nature of the work is. Some folks aren't ready, and that's not safe. And so there's beauty in that idea, but it is overly simplistic for the world we actually live in. And I think in the meeting I had, I felt some part of me that was like, not yet, man, not yet. Hopefully someday. Yeah.
Reminds me of a conversation we had an entrepreneur here when I said, this company's your baby, he said, stop. It's not my baby. Don't call a company your baby. It's not your baby. It's a company. And I feel like, again, we come back to words here. This is very important. So thank you for sharing that. America Outdoors, which you just saw the trailer of, is not a close-up zoom on birds and caimans and tigers kind of thing. You actually connect with people, with communities. And there's a fascinating question here from the audience about this. Does Baratunde see any connections or contrasts between groups of organisms in the natural world and the way that democratic societies operate or succeed or fail? How is that for an audience question?
Ooh, people have been prepared. Jeez. Okay. No phoning it in on Remote Daily, even though I'm in a phone booth. Yes, I do see parallels. I remember I've had a chance to learn about trees multiple times in the journey of the show and more broadly in the journey of my life. And I learned about this relationship actually well before the show, maybe a decade ago, between trees and each other and trees and salmon. This was in the Pacific Northwest. I went on a salmon hike with this indigenous historian and scholar and this tree scientist who work together. And you've probably are familiar with the idea that trees are a network. Sometimes trees are just one tree, like aspen, or you can have like 10,000 aspen trees, but it's actually one organism. That's a really powerful metaphor for the oneness of us all. and the idea of seeing yourself in the other, which is Valerie Kaur, Kaur, a thesis of her work and her book See No Stranger, which really informed How to Citizen. But in the Pacific Northwest hike, we were learning about how trees are aware of each other and how they will move nutrients among distinct organisms through the help of fungi and other webs of life under the surface, quality soil, that will detect a sick tree and maybe isolate it so it has time to heal and doesn't infect the rest of the group, or supercharge it and lend aid and nourishment to it. And then sometimes, in the case there, all the time, the salmon that come in, the salmon poop has all this rich nitrogen, which the trees get to through the banks of the river. So it's really simple, right? We're interconnected. We have to see each other. Like, there's no great revolution, but there is this humility involved. And when we think we are so genius and we're like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to build a machine that sucks carbon out of the sky at great expense and produces like a shitty diamond. And I'm going to call that climate innovation. You know what else does that? Trees and soil and quality topsoil, which we are ruining. And what we could do instead is just restore the natural technology. So there's something about the way we operate in our democratic society and the way trees operate in their society, not just among the trees, but with the salmon. There's a lot of exchange. And it's not charity, right? It's the salmon are getting something out of it. Each tree is getting something out of it. The fungi are getting something out of it. So you still have the self-interest thing, but the concept of self is much bigger. And so the opportunities for pursuing interests are bigger and feel a little different than how we've often positioned ourselves, which is you do you, I'll do me, myself, and I, army of one, AKA loneliness. And then we turn around and we're like, for some reason, there's a loneliness epidemic. That's because you told me I'm alone, that I have to be my whole damn army, that I have to have my own basketball court and my own movie theater system in my house and my own ward. Like, everything has to be done by me. And if I don't figure out the totality of life and all the material goods by myself, then you tell me I'm the failure? No, your system is a failure. That's a stupid design. It's literally inefficient. I got a little worked up. I apologize.
I think you're just warming up and we're at the end of the conversation. How is that happening? Can we do another hour of remote daily just after this? Who would be up for that? Please post your hearts in the Slack, in the Zoom reactions. Okay, we already got one heart. This is for another hour of remote daily, today's special episode with Baratunde. Baratunde, I'll try to squeeze one last question in,
Sure.
while a lot of hearts are raining upon you. The thing that struck us preparing for today is that America Outdoors and How to Citizen, your podcast, actually align because they have the same underlying question. It's the question that you just raised. How do we reconnect with each other in this world that is so tearing us apart? And you, in this show, while being outdoors, you were putting a focus on people. So what have you learned about the United States of America from spending lots of time with people who are really invested in their relationship with the world around them? What have you learned about your own home, these United States, from that experience, from spending so much time with these folks?
I feel like I'm running for president. I have learned that the American people are some of the hardest working people. No, I've learned that we yearn to be a part of something greater, even as we feel pressure to pursue this small goal of individual gain. We feel it intuitively. There's something more for us, and there's something more from us. And the people I've had the privilege of connecting with through this show are practicing citizen as a verb in an expansive sense. They are indigenous people who see the salmon as siblings. And they are regenerative farmers who see trees as our lungs beyond our bodies, not just timber. And there's a beautiful reminder of the diversity of the landscape which is equal among the people, especially in this country, which has so many different tribes coming together for all kind of different reasons. And I've learned that there are folks who are more grounded when they're hands in the ground, and that there's no single solution to all of our challenges, but that reconnection with nature, and especially on the climate front, the attempt to help nature heal also reverberates for our personal self-interest. And I've found people healing themselves individually from PTSD or substance abuse disorder, or collectively from traumas, and especially in group traumas like displacement in terms of indigenous people, or enslavement in terms of my people. And land and connection to it and the life beyond just human has a way of helping us reconnect very deeply in that rooted sense and connect to each other. And as we enter this future, which is so technologically prone and moves so quickly, we are destabilizing many of the things we've known about ourselves and about ourselves collectively. And that story's changing too fast for our evolution. We literally aren't wired to have jobs exist today that didn't exist 2 years ago, and then repeat that 18 months and then 6 months and then 6 days. It's kind of insane. And so we've got to tether to something else as we move more rapidly up this future curve. One of those things we tether to is each other through community, through citizening as a verb. Another thing we tether to is earth. And so we have to do this stretching thing where we're like reaching for the stars, literally, living in the cloud virtually. We got to stay on the ground too. And that whole span, that's our humanity. That will allow us, I hope, to have a human future. So this show really added a whole new depth, metaphorically and literally, to my analysis of what I think is going on and how we might do that better. And nature's a huge, huge part of that. Always has been. We've just forgotten it. It hasn't forgotten us.
And every room you're in, I feel like, is a little more healed and wholesome afterwards. And this includes this room. Thank you, Baratunde. I wish we had that second hour planned up front, because it's very hard to interview you, because I could basically just give you a question and you would just roll. Thank you, Remote Daily community. You were fantastic as always. Baratunde, what is your final message to all of us? What would you like to share with us before we part ways today?
Final parting wish for us all. Stay hydrated. Water is life.
Remote. Shake it out, daily.